Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Men Human Rights server. We are the semi-official Discord of the Men Human Rights Reddit, and this week will be an open chat. We're just generally talking about different issues. Please feel free to join at any point, and we will get right into this chat today.
Thank you, Dark. So basically what we're doing today is we're just going to be fielding whatever issues we want to talk about. Now, M Painter wanted to bring up the Johnny Depp trial, and I thought we could have a little debate over whether or not he's going to win. Now, from what I've been hearing, from how the jury is reacting and how Amber's lawyers and so on seem to be flailing, I am cautiously optimistic that the trial itself is going to be going in his favour. Now, of course, I have heard some bad things about Johnny Depp's legal team not pushing Amber hard enough, about them not confronting her with things that they could confront her with. But there is still a little bit of trial left to go, and they do still have like some responses to Amber's arguments that they can bring up. They've got more witnesses, I think. So I'm thinking that they're going to bring in their big bombshells right at the end, hopefully. They have gotten her on a couple of quite salient points, and it seems like Amber is now under investigation from the FBI for perjury, which is lying in court, and she may be subject to a perjury investigation in the UK and America. But of course, she's a pretty famous, rich woman who has everything going for her. And the only person who seems to actively be like doing anything against Amber is herself, really, because she sabotages herself so much. Oh yeah, and sorry, the FBI was actually investigating her for witness tampering, as in she apparently may have sent some thugs to break into the house, or at least one witness on the Johnny Depp trial. She may also be investigated for perjury. Sorry, I got that a little bit mixed up. But what I am seeing right now is like all the evidence seems to be on Johnny's side, but unfortunately Amber's new PR team is so effective that they've managed to convince even the pro-Johnny newspapers to shill for her. And unfortunately, they have the ear of the court reporter. They have their one of their PR teams sitting directly next to their court reporter. One of her PR team has been outed as like an abuser. So I think there may be some blowback there, but it's hard to tell. I don't think. I think that the newspapers are going to do what they generally do when a male feminist who really, like they really need, is accused of something like this, which is bury it. So just shows how completely dishonest they are. But I am open to having my mind changed, because obviously Johnny Depp's male and Amber Heard is female, and as much as Johnny Depp is extremely charming and extremely honest, and as much as Amber Heard has absolutely no evidence whatsoever, and in fact her evidence actually supports Johnny's side if you analyze it, we have to be aware that gynocentrism is a thing, and there's no way she's going to be punished in an official sense very harshly. But I do think that she has been punished socially extremely Well, she has lost an awful lot of credibility. Her time in Aquaman 2 has apparently been cut down, according to Amber herself, and she may be cut from the movie entirely. So it seems unlikely she's going to be in Aquaman 3 if there even is one. And I do think that Aquaman 2 is probably going to bomb. So I think that, but at the same time, the media are being controlled by these people who are so crazy that they've resurrected Believe All Women. And they are actually saying, no, it's not a right wing. Well, they're not actually saying that it's not a right wing hoax. They are just readopting it and saying, Believe All Women again. And just like championing this insane idea that one gender never lies about anything. So, yeah, basically, it's really hard to tell at the moment who's going to win. But M Painter, did you have a counter argument on the idea that he might win, or have I covered it so far?
No, I don't think he will win. The thing is, the abuse was never the issue. This is purely and simply a defamation case. Now, around the world, defamation cases are almost impossible to win. That's the first thing. Second of all, Johnny hasn't, in all of his evidence, proved that Amber defamed him. And all Amber has to do, and all her PR team and lawyers have to do, is cause enough confusion and enough doubt as to whether or not Johnny was abusive to Amber to win. They don't need to prove that he was. They just need to provoke doubt.
That's a good point. I mean, I have heard that he has proven that after the article, he lost pretty much all of his like he was basically blackballed, and he lost his job in Pirates and in a bunch of other things very, very quickly. And I think that's quite obvious. Like when you chart out how that was, I think that's quite obvious, and it should be obvious to the jury that after, right after that article, he just became a person non grata, and he has in fact been reduced to minor roles in like quite indie films now. He's got one called, I think it's called Mineta, which is a film that I think was made for like $1 million or something. So this is a major step down from him being able to command a salary of like 20 million or something like that. I mean, I couldn't speak to his actual finances, but yeah, I do think that from that perspective, they have been able to show that. I mean, they should have been able to show that he was majorly hurt by this. I mean, there should be. I don't recall if the witnesses ever were, able to like confirm this from in the inside, but there has been actual, like, Johnny Depp has been saying, well, his assistant, I think, was saying that in the early days of the trial that basically Disney dropped him because of the article, and Disney was giving that basically as a reason, if I recall. But obviously, the jury might think, oh, that person is biased because they're his assistant.
I think the issue is that they've proven that it's affected him in terms of financial and like personally, emotionally, mentally. But my understanding is the defamation is surrounding around the idea that Ms. Heard is connected in the process of creating the article that they're arguing. And as far as I know, there still hasn't been evidence brought up from Depp's side tying her to the article. You can say it affects him, but he's going after her, not the company. So he has to prove that connection. Now, granted, the upside, though, is she hasn't exactly brought evidence to prove that she was apart from the article either. They've both been very focused on the abuse factor. So it's like her lawyers completely forgot what it's originally about, so they still haven't proven that she wasn't connected to the article either.
I think it was the UCLA actually wrote the article, and then that got put into the Washington Post, and her name was put to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's been some kind of evidence put in that although she didn't write the article, she knew of the article, she put her name to the article, and then by retweeting the link to the article, she took ownership of it. So I think they've got her on from that sort of point of view. But again, this all comes down to the article basically said that he was abusive towards her. And we've got to remember, if you're accusing a man of domestic abuse, domestic violence, you don't actually have to prove it. All she's got to do is create enough doubt in the jury's minds so that the jury will go in her favour. I'm not sure, maybe Dakisha, you'll know more about this. Does it have to be a unanimous decision, or can it be a split?
So it's allowed to be a split, and it'll be like a majority rule. That is allowed, but they would prefer for it to be unanimous. The judge cannot force the jury to make it unanimous, but I will admit that in recent years we had a lot of issues with bigger cases where we find out later that the judge went to the jury and forced them to make a unanimous decision, and that's technically illegal to do.
My thought here is that regardless of who wins, there's going to be an appeal, and it's going to take a long time. But I think that they really should be able to nail her on the fact that she didn't obey the court order to hand over evidence. She scrubbed all of the photos of metadata before handing them over. And I think that should be easy enough to prove because all of the dates say like 1972 or something weird. It's but I mean, there's other things as well. Like she apparently keeps looking at the jury, and it's apparently making them uncomfortable, like visibly uncomfortable. That she keeps looking at them, like she's staring at them. And but you know, these are all outside perspectives. It's very hard to know what the actual jury is thinking, but we can go on body language a little bit, you know, if this is actually happening. Unfortunately, it's very hard to tell, you know, if what we have is unbiased when we're looking at the evidence from our side, because while we know that Amber is guilty as hell, what we don't know is what's going on in the courts necessarily, because people on both sides are going to pick up on different things and focus on different things and declare them evidence that one side is winning or the other is winning. So like, you know, you can look at little faux that Johnny's lawyers are making and use them to say that they are incompetent or something and that they're not going to win. So it's really kind of, you know, difficult to see if we're getting an unbiased perspective, because obviously there is already like 100 hours of footage to go through at least of this trial, and including multiple different angles to look at and things like that. So it's it's going to be very, very difficult for any like group of people to go through all of that, especially not with an unbiased mind. So I don't think we can say for sure that how either side is doing in the court. The only perspective on that matters really is the jury and the judge.
One thing I will say is, as far as I'm concerned, Amber Heard is guilty of as all hell of domestic abuse and domestic violence against Johnny Depp. I think that's fairly clear for anyone who just looks at the evidence objectively. The real crux of the case is, have they been able to prove defamation of character? And honestly, I don't think they have. I don't think he will win the case. I think Amber's team have probably done just about enough to win. Excuse me. And the only place I think Johnny has won and will continue to win is going to be in the court of public opinion.
Sorry, did I go quiet there for a second? Did you hear what I said?
I didn't, sorry, Mark, no.
Well, like I said on Twitter, I think the court of public opinion is going to be the only one that really matters in this case, because essentially the destroying her publicly is what really matters to whether or not, to this libel case, because the money itself isn't really important. Like, what they're fighting over at the moment is actually money, like damages for Johnny Depp being accused of being a wife beater in like public by Amber, basically. And that's small potatoes compared to what people think generally about Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, because we've already seen signs that Warner Brothers is actually watching this trial, and they have been looking at the petition to get rid of Amber Heard, and they are increasingly shifting towards the Johnny Depp side. Now, they might not actually take him back, but they are certainly shifting away from Amber Heard. And we think that it's quite possible her career could be over for a couple of years. So, that is certainly a victory. That's a huge victory if it actually, happens, because I think people are quite pissed with Amber Heard, and they're not going to, they're going to react to any film she is in very negatively. So for a while, at least until the public forgets, she's going to be pretty much person non grata, I think. I don't think she's going to be in any good films, whereas I think Johnny Depp may actually... there were rumours that he might be offered another Pirates role, but of course that's all smoke on the wind at this point, so we don't know for sure. But it would be good if we could reverse the situation that Johnny was in and have Amber be the person non grata and him get his career back, because obviously from the evidence he seems like a great guy, and she seems like a monster, to be honest. And if we can have them treated the way the evidence seems to suggest they act and are in real life, then I think that we have won something far bigger than any actual libel suit. But of course, if Johnny loses this libel suit, that does mean the media is going to use that against him and against Team Johnny, and against male domestic violence victims generally. And Amber Heard is going to be, but even if he does win it, that's just going to mean to them that justice has not been done, and that's we need a new trial, and that the judge should be stricken off because they're obviously corrupt, and they obviously hate women even though they are a woman, stuff like that.
Well, they've had two of these psycho feminists on Twitter. I can't remember their bleeding names at the moment. Oh, Charlotte Proudman and is it Dr. Taylor or whatever their bleeding names are. But they've both been bleating on about this case. There's been a couple of magazine articles about, as you say, believable women and stuff like that. So the feminists are fighting back hard.
I'm not sure it's the feminists so much as Amber Heard's PR team using the feminists. I mean, it feels very much like feminists are pretty much for hire in this case. I mean, we know that Charlotte Proudman and that are all hysterically supporting Amber Heard, but we never expected anything less.
I mean, feminism has just gone on a radical decline in terms of its membership, but not only its membership, but just in general the quality of the act. There was an article someone posted a while back. I'll see if I try to find it, and it was about how feminism at this point is just all about money. Feminism's become so mainstream in capitalism, and the issue with this is that people call themselves feminists, or like equalists, honestly, are just being damaged by their own title because of people like the feminists who are most likely being paid off to support Amber Heard and all. I mean, our issues is obviously complete, absolute, radical, toxic feminists who are just unwilling to accept that she could be wrong at all costs possible. That means they would have to accept that they're has flaws and wrong, have to change things, and they don't want to do that.
It's tribalism to a large extent. They are on the feminist tribe, and any indication that a man might be a victim is evidence against the feminist tribe's core message, because their message is so black and white. I mean, this is the problem of not having any nuance. I mean, you can take down and debunk any men's issue you want, and if you actually manage to debunk it, MRAs will stop talking about it and they will go on to something else. I mean, we've never had that happen, but if in theory, if you actually did that, the way we operate is we'd go, okay, we'll we've obviously been wrong here on this particular issue, so we are going to move on to something else. I mean, there's all sorts of horrible things that happen to men, so we've got no shortage of problems, and we do actually want to fix them. Feminism, on the other hand, they don't want to fix their problems. What they want to do is use the image of the problem, which they have constructed, which isn't even real, to gain political, social, and financial power. And you can tell that they are really, really, really on the power front, because everything in their theories is all about power. The Duluth model, everything. They're constantly talking about a struggle for power in their in their literature. I nearly called it research there for a moment. But this is all what
Careful,
they're about.
nearly
But
swore
they
then.
are just activists. Sorry, Painter.
I said you nearly swore then by calling what feminists write research. Got to watch your language on this stream.
Yeah, I mean, as we've covered on here before, the activist arm of, the academic arm of the activist feminist movement is basically a machine for constructing citations and then peer reviewing those citations among themselves and publishing them in order to add legitimacy to what they're saying, which makes it painfully difficult to, for example, change an article ruled by feminists on Wikipedia. So the sexism article, they've got multiple articles, they've got multiple like papers that they've published saying that sexism is mostly against women, which they have put into the top header of that article. And even though there's absolutely no research backing those articles up, the sexism article, is citing them, and it's like, this is published research, etc., etc. This is the opinion of the experts, and so by setting themselves up as the experts, they've taken control of the entire story. And this is something that people always miss when they are looking at propaganda and totalitarianism, is the experts. If you can control the experts, you can control the story. And if you control the story, you control everything. Yeah, so anyone have any topics they'd like to talk about or anything interesting they'd like to discuss in the news? Obviously, we've gone across Amber Heard. We've just touched on Wikipedia and feminist academia. But anything you'd like to mention will be gladly accepted. Like any topics you'd like to go across.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to mention some news on my front that so I have a big Title IX case. It's quite messy against Texas A&M, in which I actually have skin in the game and damages and stuff alleged. I was a student at the time. Kind of what really spurred on my Title IX activism was the abuse that I suffered in going through this system and trying to work it. And I have a news agency now that wants to pick up this story and help figure out what's going on. But they wouldn't do it unless I revealed my face and, talked on camera and stuff and did like an interview that they could show people. So decided I'm actually going to do that because and this is just an allegation. I think that Texas A&M may be covering up Title IX violations, and there's no clear indication of what kinds of violations they're covering up, and this can impact what data they're reporting to the federal government. So, like, what if they're sweeping sexual assault cases and stuff like that under the rug by doing what they did to me? And how many other people have had to go through this? Like, it's a pretty big deal if they're doing this to people that were victims of pretty serious crimes. So I decided to go forward with it, and I think it's important that we get to the bottom of this. I can't walk away from this knowing that this is going to be this is likely to be happening to other people. So it's a pretty big development on my side that I'm actually going to get a news agency to pay some attention to this.
I'm really, really glad to hear that, and I'm really glad you're going through with it. I mean, it's going to be scary, and it's going to, like, I don't know what, but it's the amount of good you could do is incredible. I mean, it could help your own case even. It could do any, it could really, really the landscape if organization starts paying attention to the whole Title IX situation. But at the moment, it's just radar.
Yeah, the key points in my allegations, and again, for anybody listening and record keeping and covering my own butt, these are just allegations, but I do believe I have substantial evidence to back them up, is that I have internal emails of them saying that they didn't file notice of my cases to their official system, which is very concerning. And they didn't follow any of the standard administrative procedure stuff. Well, I shouldn't say any. I'm sure they filed some of it, but like they didn't do an intake meeting, didn't counsel me on my rights, didn't inform me of like my right to appeal, all that stuff. And it's a pretty serious thing when they do that. And like if enforcement actually came down on them for it, they could get in a lot of trouble for that. So it's perplexing on why they would do that for just me complaining about a couple of programs, right? Like why take that risk? And it makes me think that maybe there's something a little bit bigger going on here where they just felt emboldened enough to start doing it to some of the smaller things. I think that they panicked when I started emailing some other people in the administration asking questions. Right after I'd done that, there was an internal email at their Title IX office. These internal emails, my attorney got via FOIA, and they had a meeting regarding me reaching out to these people, and they wanted to get ahead of me and contact anyone I might contact to let them know what was going on or whatever. And right after that is when my emails started going to spam at the school. So I think that they were trying to stop me from even potentially alerting other people in the administration to what was going on. They didn't want people asking questions. They panicked because I think that I was onto something there. And once internal emails show that they had completed getting ahead of me and contacting people, that's when my email stopped going to spam. And like their attorney was refusing to give me information on my cases, and he said it was because I have or might file a complaint with a federal agency that enforces this. That's, in my opinion, explicit retaliation. And OCR had all of this from the most of it from the beginning. The FOIA emails came towards the end because it was a long, protracted process, and OCR ended up dismissing this huge thing, and I'm only giving you the cliff notes here, without a single reference to law, and they had a senior case attorney work it for 1.5 years. The small piece that they did move into investigation, I think they only did that because there was actual precedence within OCR for ruling that program discriminatory. It was like a women's self-defense class thing. There had been previous rulings on it at other schools, so they kind of had to take a look. And when they ended up dismissing that, they said that the school had told them they canceled the program in 2019 for being a violation. But that's not true. I complained about it in 2020. The internal FOIA emails show them talking about how they were going to be continuing to advertise it and whether or not they needed to make changes to the language. And I have a screenshot of them advertising it in 2021. So, and this is just my suspicion of what is going on underneath. It's not necessarily something that's true, but I think that the school lied to OCR to get the investigation dismissed, because that would then keep OCR from looking at my complaint about the program, because the school can just ignore the complaint basically if it's moot, if the program's canceled or whatever. So OCR wouldn't dig into how they handled my complaint. So this was an attempt to keep OCR's eyes off of them. That's what I think anyway. And the news agency seemed pretty interested in all of what was going on. There's no reason that the school should be refusing to update me on my cases or provide that information when, if I ask what the status of my case is, you should tell me. Don't tell me that it's in review when I now have internal emails showing that you guys are making changes and that you've actually closed some of them. It's been over 2 years and I still don't know the status of some of those cases I filed as a student. That's preposterous. And the whole OCR thing, when they dragged it out, they did it because the administration was changing. And in November, Lehman, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, Lhamon, was reappointed to head of OCR, and she has a really bad legacy of dereliction of duty and anti-male discrimination in leading OCR. And within, I think, 2 weeks of that appointment is when I got that dismissal that didn't even reference the law as having informed it. And that's unheard of because it's pretty common to see in these, even in a dismissal, that OCR will mention what funding regulations they kind of looked at for compliance and were thinking about when reviewing it. And there was nothing like that here. I think my attorney used the words bullshit in describing it. So I think that there was political interference in that. And when I appealed, OCR ghosted me. They wouldn't confirm receipt, and my attorney said that they were unresponsive to him as well. And it wasn't until I got Senator Rick Scott's office to crack the whip on OCR that they actually responded to me. The senator's office submitted a formal request for the current status of my case and like what office I think was handling it, some little details like that. And it wasn't until then, and it's ridiculous that a student should have to get a federal senator involved to have OCR even acknowledge that they had received appeal of their case. I'd sent multiple follow-up emails to them spanning months, and they wouldn't say anything. And I think it's they're trying to figure out how to get rid of this case. I don't think that for this case I can rely on the system treating me fairly. I think there's too much political interference at OCR with it, and I think that there's too much corruption at the A&M office. So I need to get media involved to turn on the heat. They're going to do me dirty on this if nobody else is looking at it. That's almost a guarantee. So I really do think that I need to go forward with this, which is why I'm going to end up doing that interview, and people will find out who I am and stuff. But it's got to happen. There's no way around it. And in pushing my activism forward, eventually I'm going to have to show who I am to start getting in the news and getting people to look at this. Guess it's time to rip the Band-Aid off.
Can't they do something which is done over here, where you're filmed in shadow and your voice is disguised, but you're still on camera?
She said that for her editor wants to be able to put a name on it and stuff. He's worried about it being too much heresy, unless there's like a real name and everything attached to it. And in this case, I kind of get it. They are a little bit of a smaller news organization. It's like a local town news kind of a thing. So
yeah,
they might not be really willing to commit the legal resources to something that's potentially politically unpopular and being a small institution. So
for a smaller organization, it's just too easy, to dismiss and discredit a disguised voice with a veiled face. Either it's one of those things you would either have to, make yourself public right then and there, or you would probably end up that way anyway. But not by your own choosing. This way, it's you saying, "Hey, it's me," and the news organization can stand on that. They'll say, "No, it's this guy, and he has been, doing this, and here's the paper trail behind it." It's a better deal if you're going to involve the media.
And the complaint that like kicked this all off, I mean, and a lot. So I was subject to a lot of discrimination on the basis of sex when I was at A&M, and a lot of it's going to be heresy and anecdotal evidence. It's hard to point to exact facts, rather like for situations and things that happened. And the straw that just broke my back on this was an email. I'd spent quite a while searching for jobs, and it took me a while to finally to get employed. And I was looking through my emails, and I saw that they were advertising a job fair, and I looked at it was like one-on-one meetings with recruiters and stuff, so you had to apply to attend the job fair with limited seats. And at the end of the application, it asked, are you female engineer in STEM? And next to no, it said something along the lines of, "Please do not apply. We prioritize female engineers in STEM." I was like, fuck this shit. I'm done. Like, I'm gonna file a complaint. And I don't think the school is happy about that. And the director that oversees the student organization and stuff that was running that job fair, in my follow-up emails with her, she let it slip that Intel, the employer that was that the job fair was for, had, quote, specifically or asked for specific attendees, and that they, the organization running the job fair, had passed that language along. So the employer behind the scenes, I think, was even asking for that discrimination, and they were like, "Oh yeah, this is totally fine," and passed it along. And A&M's resolution was to remind the organization of the rules. Are you fucking kidding me? They knew what they were doing. You can't. It's impossible to think that they didn't know you can't limit job fairs by gender or tell people not to apply because of their gender. Then they later gave them an award for diversity and inclusion. So there's that.
Yeah, it's it can't be attributed to anything other than the success of the politics of revenge. Everything, all of what you're describing stands on the idea that someone such as yourself, should be punished and constrained and set aside because of things that happened well before you were born. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. It cannot be honestly described any other way. It really is just the politics of revenge. And the only thing good you can say about it is that it's unfortunately often very effective. It's morally repugnant. It's a sign of degrading social order that it goes that far that often. But it's one of I find myself saying this quite a lot. Under these conditions and in this environment, it's unwise, to be surprised or shocked by that, because this is the water we're currently swimming in.
Yeah, and I think that this case in particular is worthy of me doxing myself, because it shows how systemic it is. I mean, this school wouldn't be doing these things so flagrantly and in writing if they didn't feel confident that OCR wouldn't come down on them for it. They're relying on the system failing. And I mean, sure, I can like go to court or something like that, but that's cost prohibitive. That's why the organizations like OCR exist. They're supposed to act as a power lever between the individual and these larger organizations, and they just don't do that. It's a problem with the way Title IX is written. Um, it's it's not Title IX is not about discrimination. It is about misuse of federal funds.
Right.
So when OCR is investigating, you have to remember that they're not really investigating discrimination. They're investigating about whether or not federal funds were misused. So the victim is sidelined in the entire process. They're just a fly on the wall. It's OCR versus the school. And what you want and what happened to you is an afterthought in that process. Like compare it to employment law where it's not about the misuse of funds. It is about discrimination and individual rights. And EEOC that enforces that is not an enforcer like OCR. EEOC is an investigator, and they'll investigate, find violations, and then they'll go to court if you want them to, or they'll settle on your terms if you agree to them. It puts the control in the victim's hands, and OCR doesn't. That is why I think that we have all of the issues we do with OCR. It has everything to do with those three nasty little words at the end of Title IX, federal financial assistance. There's no reason that we shouldn't have a right to be educated free of discrimination. I don't think it should be tied to federal funds. It's completely corrupted the entire process.
Sure. That's why they named it the Office of Civil Rights. So then anyone giving it a cursory glance, is going to assume that here's an office designed to protect the civil rights of in this case, student. It's great camo, but as you say, it's, just something to keep the universities and their attendant institutions ahead of any real challenge to their, frankly, corruption. Before there was this corruption, there was some other kind of corruption. This is just the latest iteration of it. But like I say, as long as the money keeps flowing in, they're not incentivized to correct.
And see, that's the problem, right? Like Title IX, the only real teeth that it has is the revocation of federal funding, because it's not actually a right that you have. It's a right that the taxpayers have to not have their federal funding misused. And I think even recently, some courts were ruling that you can't sue for emotional distress due to like Title IX stuff at schools and all this. And I think from my understanding that a lot of that stems from those three little words at the end of Title IX. It's an offense to the government when they commit a violation, not the individual.
Right.
So I don't think that this is something we can fix without removing those words.
Probably not, or at least not in any way that will stick. And whenever I hear about a situation like yours and the extremity that you personally have to go through, just to move the needle a little bit, I always think about the after effect, and I think about, like, say, for example, you achieve a best possible outcome in your case, in your situation. I'm skeptical thinking that they're going to, step all the way back and say, maybe we ought to get rid of those three little words, and everything that goes with them. So, like I say, that's one of the things that troubles me about even, going to the media and having it, kind of go viral and become important and visible, is that, somebody will have to stand up and say, none of this would be happening if it wasn't for this language and for this this structure of OCR and the Title IX, legislation, attendant policies, dear colleague letter, etc. It's just, it's way too big of a club in the wrong hands, and those hands are, they're not overseen until I run to the press. And it's like the next person is going to have to do the same thing. Do we just want to chase this around the rings of perdition, or do we want to do something about it? Do we want to actually make it right? Because if you're not John Q. Public, sir, if you're not happy about this as a taxpayer, guess what? Until this is entirely restructured, it will happen again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not for a year or longer, but it's going to keep happening.
Yeah, and along those lines about people wanting to keep it around because of the power it gives them. This is some OCR is entirely under the jurisdiction of the executive branch. It is a political agency, and the way it's proceeded is that it's not actually very clear what would be okay under Title IX. And when so schools basically do what they want if it's not explicitly prohibited in the regulation, and sometimes they run afoul, and the court will, somebody goes to court and the court effectively puts up an out of bounds wall for them. Right. So really what it is it allows for discrimination until there is somebody putting up an out of bounds wall. Yeah. There is a whole lot of interpretation that goes on there. So now what we have is the executive branch being allowed to interpret the law itself and enforce that law. That is extremely dangerous. Especially when it comes to something as critical as education. I would say that is equally, if not more important, than employment. So I think it should be palatable to people to say that, yes, in this country you do have a right to not experience discrimination in education. I don't see a reason that this should be something that's treated significantly differently than employment. Sure, there's going to be some caveats that would be reasonable still, like contact sports and sure. Things like choir, what have you.
Right.
But employment has those little caveats too.
True. Yeah, I mean,
I think it's completely arbitrary to say that it needs federal funding to have that limit on it.
Yeah, it's between employment or education, there are a different set of caveats and limits and restrictions, but it's based on the same principle. And like I say, the missing screw is, anybody being willing to, I guess, enforce that principle. He said OCR is a bureaucracy, under the executive. And so people have gotten very used to bureaucracies being part of the executive branch, but what they manage to slip in under the radar is that sometimes those bureaus take on the role of, of a pseudo judiciary. Like they take on the role of the court, and the court shrugs and says, well, it's it's not really it's not a criminal law, and it's not going to be a matter of civil law until somebody shows up in front of my bench complaining, with a lawyer. Again, you're the exception and not the rule. Most people just hang their head and say, well, I lost, I got done over. It's like for the attention of the media and the ability to put it in front of just people in general, it seems to me like you might not have gotten the attention of a media organization if there wasn't this kind of underpinning concern that men like yourself are just abandoning higher education, which they are. Their enrollment is down, and it's been trending down, and that's got long-term consequences. You mentioned earlier that higher education, is such a critical thing. We've lived most of our history as humans without it. It's a pretty recent development, and somebody has to stand up and ask people, do you want to go back to that? Because we can. This fairly thin veneer, of technical and social and cultural advance can be stripped away, with very little effort. All young men have to do is just step out of the way, and we're back in mud huts. But you have to tell people, is this what you want? Because that's what you're going to get if you keep up. There has to be a consequence, and it has to be put in front of them.
Exactly. And we have a model for a system that's at least somewhat successful and less controversial. Like we see that it's worked out pretty well in employment. There's going to be things that need to be better and stuff like that. There's always going to be. Not saying that the employment law is without flaw when it comes to discrimination, but it's not something that we see making headlines in the news all the time. It's not dominating the news feeds, and I don't understand why we don't move to that system for education. Like when we get better compliance, when there's monetary incentive for attorneys to represent clients in exchange for a contingency, like they do with a lot of employment discrimination cases, and that helps set the case law, that helps get the out of bounds walls put up faster, and it makes things clearer. And EOC is not out there interpreting the law themselves. They're letting the courts do it. So you don't have this constant policy change, like unwritten policy change going on internally that makes it difficult for the schools themselves to comply, even if they wanted to. And by removing those words, you're going to put the power back into the victim's hands to get justice themselves. It's going to let the legal system function the way it was intended to. And this is entirely designed to circumvent that process. And that is terrifying.
Sure.
Courts should be the ones deciding this. Like, if an employer thinks that you committed sexual harassment, they don't need to have a fucking tribunal. They can just, their HR looks at it, maybe looks at a little bit of evidence, goes, yep, goodbye, fires you. And if you think it was done wrong and you have good evidence of that, take them to fucking court over it.
Right.
Why is that different with education?
Well, that obstacle, as you were saying, that obstacle that the HR department for the corporation, the obstacle to just carelessly firing people who are accused, it doesn't yet exist in the academy. There isn't sufficient civil legal precedence to say, for the academies to say, hey, if we keep this up, they're just going to sue us out of business. They'll break us and then we'll have nothing. I like I say, I understand why, because of the sleight of hand around federal funding, and the difference between an employment position, right, or set of employment positions, and a project or program or course offered by a college. People look at that differently, and they shouldn't. It's a big mistake. So like I say, it's it's one thing for an industry or some few large corporations to be dragged through civil court and have to make good or go out of business. That's one thing, because there will always be more. But the thing about higher education especially is once you've blown it, once you've undone the ability for people to learn what they need to learn to function, it doesn't, there's no makeup, there's no do-over. It's like that generation is just, unable to function at that level, and like I say, that's the one thing, I haven't heard very much of, is what will happen when, 10, 15 years down the road. I mean, even yourself, you're pretty motivated and pretty determined, but still, everything that's happened to you and everything you've had to do colors your perspective of learning past the age of 18. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It matters. I mean,
And look back through history in our country. Look at all the fucked up discrimination we've had in education. I mean, how many civil rights movements do we need to have that are specifically addressing this issue before we decide to call it an actual right? And again, those nasty three little words make it the government versus the institution. But those three words make me, as a taxpayer, able to write complaints. If they removed them, I probably could not write complaints, because for most of these cases, I'm not directly discriminated against. But again, I don't have to be the direct victim, because it's not an actual right. And if you look at a lot of the cases that have hit courts, the ones that are successful tend not really to be arguing on Title IX grounds. At least the ones that get damages and stuff to people, they tend to be arguing on 14th Amendment grounds when it's a state institution, or they'll be arguing due process rights. So those arguments where people are actually able to try and challenge these things in court don't find themselves landing in Title IX itself. They find them lying in actual rights outside of Title IX. Title IX is a farce in making people think that it protects you from discrimination, or it gives you a right to have an education free from discrimination. It doesn't. It just tells the government they're not allowed to fund such a thing. There's no right for you there.
Yeah, as you say, if it's not sufficient to meet the Title IX standard for federal funding, it's not like there aren't any alternatives, that just completely ring fence and discriminate an entire program at a university. As you say, you had that little entry in what you were filling out saying, please don't apply, right? And like I said, it's a rigged game, you know. When they can't get away with it one way, they have plenty of other options, and you're either going to lose as a taxpayer or as a potential student, you know. But one way or another, the house always wins.
Yeah.
So,
That's why I've been mulling it over for a while, and I think my long-term mission with all this is to get those 3 words removed. I do think it should be an individual right, and I think that will solve a lot of problems. I don't think there's a good reason that it isn't. So that's my goal. If I hit that, you know, I might consider hanging up the hat on activism for a while to get those words removed and take a little bit of a break. But I think we're more than a decade away from that at least. So whatever.
maybe not. I mean, it depends on, you know, how your case and cases like yours that get attention go. It's like I say, you know, people will start to see those longer people, you know, the economic structure will start to see that, you know, this is a road to disaster, and, you know, they'll start putting pressure of their own, and then you won't, you know, it won't be all about having to, you know, fight all by yourself, right? And, you know, I say that's the, you know, that's the better long-term outcome, is that people don't have to fight tooth and nail, you know, to call out and get corruption corrected. You know, the like you mentioned in the chat, the EEOC, you know, is a built-in bulwark. You know, it's basically an open threat, you know, to the corporate world. Look, you know, you can do this if you want to, but we'll break you if you do. We'll just close you down, right? And that language, we're not hearing that language with the colleges and universities yet. You know, but the reason we do hear it in that world is because, like I said, you know, it was sort of a snowball effect. People just got tired of it, you know, of being mishandled and mistreated and falsely terminated, et cetera, and so forth. And, you know, they took them to court. It'll have to be more of the same.
And this is like, I've been working, like, a lot of these cases, sure, they're interesting and stuff, but it's the ones I've filed, it's mainly surrounding me learning the ins and outs of the process, how OCR thinks and evaluates cases so that I can write stronger cases. Like most of them, I've selected them because they've touch on like one critical area. And it'll allow me to very easily see, like, how does my argument for this impact outcome,
Right.
and that informs me for the next time. All right, how do I argue this better? And I think I've gotten to the point where I can do this pretty successfully. I think I know most of the common pitfalls and how to avoid them. And I've been working on, I've mentioned it a couple times, a pretty big case, and I have a draft for it and everything. And I think this is going to be the real spearhead of a lot of my work that I've been leading up to. It's over 200 violations at the school, multiple criminal allegations of intentional fraud to OCR. OCR has issued 2 resolutions in the past due to how absolutely incompetent their Title IX staff are. I think like the first one was they had to do a bunch of extra training and stuff like that, and OCR had to approve of it. And then they kept fucking up. So OCR issued another one, and in that one, they did a full review of the qualifications of all of their Title IX staff to determine if they were capable of doing their jobs. And then they're in a monitoring period where OCR is also checking the qualifications of anybody that they hire into that office. And basically, the both the school and OCR are then attesting that those people are competent. So how is that going on? And then I'm able to find over 200 violations. How is that even possible? Somebody is lying when they're signing that form telling OCR that they're compliant with the resolution, that people are competent, and somebody is lying in assuring OCR in general when they have to sign a form of compliance to get federal funding.
Mm-hmm.
They're lying. They know these are violations. They've been advertising them. It's impossible to think that as a member of the public, I would be able to find flagrant violations like that and in such massive volume. And the pattern goes back to 20 years.
Right.
How am I able to find that? But they're meanwhile attesting their Title IX staff are competent and capable of doing their jobs, and that they're compliant.
Yeah.
Somebody's lying.
Yes, that's correct.
See that, or the whole thing is intertwined.
Yeah, but in this case, it carries potential personal criminal charges for those signatories. And I think that once we start getting to the people in the office and holding them accountable like that, we might see some change. When people are personally affected by it, and it's not, oh, well, worst comes to worst, the institution gets sued, right?
Right.
When it personally impacts them, things change.
Right. It's a different manner of threat and motivation. You know, when, like you say, for over 20 years, at some point, you know, this is not a development of competence. You know, it's fraud and negligence. You know, and those are crimes. They don't get processed in civil court. They get processed in criminal court, and you know, it's criminal cases against individuals. But as I'm sure you know, that's really tricky. You know, I mean, it's you really got to be able to demonstrate that there's no way it could be other than fraud and negligence.
Yeah, and in this case, that's what I think I've done. I got the university in a double bind where either they have been accurately attesting that their Title IX staff are competent, in which case the Title IX staff themselves have committed fraud, or the school itself committed fraud in assuring the OCR that their Title IX staff are competent. Yeah. And so the Title IX staff are incompetent and were not capable of finding these issues, and therefore they didn't commit fraud. I don't see a situation here where it wasn't committed. And I would love, and with all that went on with this, I think this should be the first case where OCR pulls the trigger and pulls funding. How many times do you get another chance and continue fucking up before the hammer comes down? And that's going to put a lot of pressure on the school to throw the staff under the bus, divulge those emails to preserve its own financial interest in keeping that funding.
Yeah.
So it now pits the school against their own Title IX staff. It creates a really interesting scenario. I think I've worked up to the point where I've written it well enough. I know enough about the cases that I can probably push this through if I manage to get a little bit of media attention, maybe some good notable public support too. It's part of why I've been helping to build my, I guess, brand a little bit, to kind of prime that.
Nice. And like I say, that sort of it can sustain that best possible outcome, you know, and kind of stretch it out, because it's one thing for people to shrug and say, oh my God, you know, once again, the pseudo bureaucrats working for OCR have bungled again, but it's another thing for them to really realize, hey, this is a bunch of crooks, right? This is a scheme, and that's criminal. People don't like criminals, but they're, like I say, overly patient with people they perceive to be incompetent. But if they say,
think
wait a
part of
second,
that-
this is just a scam, then that will, I think it will cause people to be a little more persistent in their objection to it.
Yeah, and that stems back, their timidness in a lot of their enforcement stems back to those nasty 3 words. The only teeth that the law has for this is a completely nuclear option. Pulling federal funding from a school is that's catastrophic. That's basically killing the school.
Yeah.
And that impacts a lot of students. That level of damage to students is really hard to justify for small infractions. I would even for that job fair, there's no way I would advocate pulling federal funding for that. Right.
Yeah.
And so, but it's not an individual right either. So OCR isn't going to impose monetary damages and award them to you for them having done that. So it just turns into an administrative slap on the wrist, maybe some obnoxious training and reporting requirements that cause them to have to hire somebody else. But it's nothing. There's no real deterrent. It's just more bureaucracy. It bloats the system more, and if there's one thing schools it's more bureaucracy. So whatever, keep doing it. Who cares?
I might be getting the wrong end of the stick here, but this seems a bit like the FAA with Boeing in the last few years.
Maybe I'm not super familiar.
Well, obviously you know about the 737 MAX, which they had 2 massive fatal accidents a couple of years back.
Yep, I remember that. Yeah.
Well, basically Boeing told the FAA that the aircraft wasn't new, there was no new systems on it, and the FAA, which basically went, okay, so Boeing self-certified the aircraft. It's sort of the same thing, where one side is telling the other that everything's okay through one channel or another, and the people that are meant to have oversight over all this stuff are just basically going, yeah, okay, and not doing anything when problems do crop up.
Right. Just like I said, it's just state-sponsored fraud, the government that's supposed to, in theory, is supposed to, challenge Boeing self-certification. That's the fox watching the hen house, and the tax dollars going to the government is supposed to be specifically for the purpose of saying you can't do that, and once they say, well, yeah, go ahead, that opens a very wide door for a lot of stuff that makes government very useless. And like I say, and puts them in collusion with fraud.
Which is why we need to put this back in the hands of the courts. It's going to establish more reasonable penalties to violations. It's going to empower victims, and it's going to force the system to adhere to the law itself and even case law. As an example, I'd complained about a hackathon that Rutgers was running, and the event advertised itself as I think it was New Jersey's largest all-female hackathon, something like that. And I complained, and they said that it wasn't discrimination because technically anybody could apply. And of course, it's easy to balk at that and be like, WTF? But there's real case law surrounding that. I don't remember the case offhand. I'll look it up while I'm talking here, but there was a case quite a while back, and the Supreme Court had ruled that when, let me grab the quote. Give me a second. I just the other night I reorganized all of my my Title IX documents because they were just like sitting on my desktop, and yeah, just digging through the folder. Okay. Right. So it was Teamsters versus United States, and it said, and this is quoting the court: if an employer should announce his policy of discrimination by a sign reading "whites only" on a hiring office door, his victims would not be limited to the few who ignored the sign and subject themselves to personal rebuffs. The same message can be communicated to potential applicants more subtly, but just as clearly by the employer's actual practices, by his consistent discriminatory treatment of actual applicants, by the manner in which he publicizes his vacancies, his recruitment techniques, his response to casual or tentative inquiries, and even the racial or ethnic composition of that part of his workforce from which he has discriminately excluded members of minority groups. When a person's desire for a job is not translated into a formal application solely based on his unwillingness to engage in a futile gesture, he is as much a victim of discrimination as he who goes through the motions of submitting an application. And little distinction has been made in the law, like on this topic, between sex and race. So OCR was basically ignoring case law that, yes, if it's predominantly, or as they call it, all female, it's advertised that way, I shouldn't have to point to somebody that was turned away because they were a man, and it shouldn't be, well, technically anybody could apply. The courts have already ruled this quite a while ago. If you can't hang a sign on the door that effectively says whites only and then go, it's not discrimination because technically we wouldn't have kicked anybody that was non-white out of the store. It's preposterous. It's already settled, but they'll continue to do it because it's not going to court. Right. They can do what they want.
Right.
There's no oversight.
No, and like I said, it's not only is it not going to court nearly enough anyway, but that the the principal respondents are guilty, of crimes, right? And they're never going to see the inside of a criminal court, as long as everything just kind of gets handled, in civil court or by some settlement with a NDA or administrative action, even if it comes out to firing some really bad actor, the one bad actor is out of the picture, but the system continues, and you can just believe that for every one you roll out the door, there'll be two more waiting to take their place.
Do you think there's probably some policies put in place there that specific things are done in a specific way, which is causing this situation? Because if Title IX down there can find literally hundreds of violations on his own without even being an investigator looking over the thing themselves, I'm pretty sure that there has to be some sort of policy going on. This has to be some sort of matter of not just systemic bias within the people, within the culture, but it has to be some sort of top-down thing. Yeah. But in any case, I think we should probably take this to open chat now, because we've been going for long enough that we should probably end the live stream. So if Dark, you could take us out, we'll go to free chat and you can carry on talking.
Thank you everyone for coming this week. This has been the Men's Human Rights Discord server. We are here every Friday at 4 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. We're always happy to have you here. It's been a fantastic chat as always. If you ever have a topic you want to recommend, you can always message Men Are Human, Blue Orange, or myself. Hope you all have a good week, and goodbye.